responsibility for that we seem to always neglect. We make an attempt, we spend some money, but we never spend enough and we never do a good enough job. And that is in the area of taking care of our veterans. We must do a much better. Vietnam, it was denied that Agent Orange had anything to do with illnesses following. It took many years for us to get the benefits that were necessary. After the Persian Gulf War, there was a Persian Gulf War syndrome, which is a very real syndrome. It was very difficult. And as coming from this, as from the view of a physician as well as a congressman, it was always very frustrating to get the treatment necessary for our veterans. And even today, it's unbelievable what is going on in the election. We have more homeless people that are veterans than anybody could conceive. Right now, this to me is so disturbing that 120 veterans per week are committing suicide because of lack of treatment for the problems that come after serving an active duty. This is astounding. We have homeless and out in the street and not medical care. We have over 200,000 waiting in line to try to get benefits from the Veterans Administration. So we should start thinking about a much wiser foreign policy and start taking care of our people here at home as well as our veterans. This year is over $3 trillion, the biggest ever, as is obvious, and yet the deficit is bigger than ever. But the real problem is, and the reason why this is different than the problems we faced in the 70s when we had to pay for guns and butter, is that we're a much poorer nation now. On the surface, you can't prove that because a lot of people still have a lot. But the one thing that they don't talk about, which a lot of people have, a lot of businesses have, and our government has, is a lot of debt.
That's right.
That's where the problem is. We as a nation now owe almost $3 trillion to foreigners. We cannot operate our welfare state or our warfare state without borrowing from countries like China. This is not sustainable. This is the reason that we have to do some cutting. So, as we see the foreign policy in the Middle East not helping us but undermining our very defense, we also see that our troops around the world do not help us either. So not only would I like to see the day when we bring our troops home from the Middle East, but we need to finally come home from Korea and Japan and millions of dollars if we had a different foreign policy. On the proposal just recently to get an appropriations bill passed, there was a compromise. They say Congress doesn't work together. Unfortunately, they do too often. They work together by raising everything, having everybody happy. I would say, let's cut everything. Let's cut everything back now to get a balance. Yeah! Test on how a country is doing is the value of its currency. And right now, the vote is that we're not doing too well.
That's right. That's
we have been able to get away with it for a long time because we have been an economic powerhouse and on the surface remain a powerhouse. And we still are a military powerhouse, and even though we have our weaknesses there, we are still very, very powerful. We have more weapons than all the other countries put together. Nobody's going to attack us. We are going to face defeat here domestically, economically, not by an invasion of any country. The Soviet system came to an end, not because we had to invade them. They had 40,000 missiles and nuclear bombs, and we still did not have to fight a nuclear war with them. They collapsed because economically they were not viable. And our system of government is not economically viable, and we have to face up to that fact and do something about it. The value of the currency, and right now the value of the currency is going down. The Canadian dollar is stronger than our dollar. It is gained about 25 to 30% here in the last couple of years. When the dollar goes down, that means Inflation is on its way back. And you know, ask the average person that does a little grocery shopping, they know that inflation is already here. Ask somebody who has to pay for medical care, or education costs, or buy gasoline, or heat their house. Inflation is roaring. The private calculation of inflation is around 10%. And yet what does our government tell us? Don't worry about it, it's only 2%. Now when they do that, why they do that is the cost of living increases for the retirees. They know they can't afford the cost of living increases, so the cost of living is going up at 10%, you get a cost of living increase of 2%, you're losing 8% a year, and then we wonder why people are getting nervous and worried and cutting back on what they're spending, because there's no other way. This is what's happening. So until we understand the importance of the issue of money, we cannot solve these problems. Governments always have the tendency to tax and overtax.
That's right, Dr. Paul.
Thousands of years they have evolved. And there's always this tendency to borrow and overborrow. And for hundreds, if not thousands of years, they've known how to inflate the currency, debase the currency. Today it's a little bit more sophisticated because they can do it with a computer. But eventually that ends. And that ends, and that is what we're seeing today.
Yes, sir.
And when that happens, you're going to end up with a lot of high interest rates and the standard of living going down. And what it can do, and what it's in the process of doing now, is wiping out the middle class. The transfer of wealth occurs when you base a currency from the middle class to the wealthy. Wall Street, in spite of their difficulties, last year, at the end of the year, were able to hand out bonuses of $38 billion. And that is not capitalism, that is a transfer of wealth through this currency system. From the very first race I ever ran in 1974, I started talking about monetary policy, and I continue to. But there's a big difference this year. There's a lot of other people talking about it, and everybody is starting to realize something has to be done. The campuses where I visit, the young people are excited and interested and understand monetary policy. Unfortunately for our country, they understand it a lot better than they do in Washington.
That's right. Yeah.